Thank you, Mr. Chair. How gracious. Mr. Chair, I'd like to begin the debate in the committee stages on this bill by making a special mention of the woman who has championed the cause for people who are preyed upon by loan sharks consistently over the last nearly 6 years, and that is Carol Beaumont, my colleague, who has taken this issue and been like a terrier on the cause of trying to ensure that there is progress. Of course, there have been other people involved, and of course this is a government bill which we are supporting tonight, and although we do have some issues which you're going to hear a lot about, Mr. Chair, but this bill and the work that's been done on that there has been so much effort and commitment put into that by Carol Beaumont, and I think it's really important that the House recognises that. I also want to make a special mention, and I know that we often thank officials, but I do actually want to say to the officials that this has been quite a complex piece of work, and your work has been exemplary on this and really detailed and thoughtful. And I know that hasn't been the easiest bill. This has had a long gestation. As I think the Minister acknowledged, it's gone through several ministers. I think the Minister sitting in the chair might be the third Minister, at fourth, that this bill has gone, has taken this bill through, which is actually another issue that has to be put on the table, because the number of the time taken to get this sort of legislation through the processes that does need to come under scrutiny in the House, because it's actually 5, I'm being told, 5 ministers.
7 or 6.
Oh my goodness. Well, anybody listening out there would be kind of scratching their head thinking, well, why? And we know that there are some complex issues, but we've certainly seen far more complex legislation actually be rushed through this House at breakneck speed when it's been on other issues. This particular piece of legislation is about addressing issues for the lowest paid, some of the most vulnerable people in our communities who are being preyed upon by some of the most unscrupulous and rotten people in our communities. And one would actually think that this would have been given a higher priority. And I'd also want to note, because I think we need to tease this out later on, is the actual resource that's being put in behind the scenes to do the work on this and the important work on this. And I've got some question marks around that, and I do want to put on notice to the Minister that that the work that needs to be done, that's still to be done on this bill, that we need to be reassured, not just in the Commerce Commission, but in the Ministry itself, that there is the resource that's required to do the work and to get this thing through, so that it's not just passed in the House, but actually that those regulations are written and that it can actually come into effect as soon as possible. We debated earlier this week the psychoactive substances bill, which went through whoosh, just like that, under urgency, because there was a great deal of political pressure and community unrest and unease out there, and all of a sudden the stops got pulled out and that got through. So the point being that people who are our most exploited and our most vulnerable are usually the people who have the least voice and therefore get ignored in the course of things. And so I guess our champion of those people will not be letting up, and neither will the Labour Party. Just on that cycle of debt and poverty, Mr. Chair, that this is trying to address, just to give a little example myself, and I note that others in this House no doubt will be giving examples. Just recently, in my electorate office in Dunedin South, I have had a case of someone coming in absolute desperate straits, having got themselves, Mr Chair.
Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Themselves into terrible debt and having no wage, being a solo parent, and for various reasons, which obviously I'm not going to go into, they have found themselves with lots of debt. That person was begging me as the MP to actually try and to use me as a reference to a loan shark. Because they couldn't see any other way out of their predicament. Now, needless to say, I'd just like to hasten to say that was not the course of action that I have taken, but the amount of work that you have to do with those constituents is quite high because of the situation that they find themselves in, where self-harm, where desperation, where it appears that there is no way out for many of them. And I would look around the House today and challenge any MP to say that they haven't had those sorts of experiences with people who do find themselves in these sorts of situations. And they're in these situations for lots and lots of reasons, but the commonality of those reasons include the high cost of living, low wages, the rising cost of basics such as food, electricity, etc., the lack of language and the lack of financial literacy, which I say to the government today that the government claims to have made raising financial literacy in our community as a priority, that these are the people who have not got the financial literacy and find themselves in these sorts of situations. Government has lots of levers that it can use to effect change. This pretty good piece of legislation, and I am disappointed with New Zealand First's decision. I understand why they're making that decision, but I would also like to say that there has been an awful lot of work gone into this bill, and a number of those levers are being exercised to effect change. But one of the most critical levers has been left out, and that is the cap on interest rates. And we've heard that there is so much, has been so much movement internationally on this issue, that there is movement in many jurisdictions on this issue, and yet New Zealand has decided that, oh no, we shouldn't go there, and that they say that it's in the advice that we got to the Select Committee that it was seen, a cap on interest rates was seen as being a blunt instrument. Well, I suppose I'd like to say in response two things. One is, show us the concrete evidence that it won't work. Show us that, and also think about the blunt instruments that are being used every day out there in our communities by loan sharks and repossession crooks who are turning up with literal blunt instruments and actually using them on citizens, on people in our communities, to try and to see their debts paid, their debts based on hundreds, sometimes +% interest rates. And those are the sorts of blunt instruments that I would have thought that this government and that the community's expectations would be that we address those blunt instruments and not take account of an alleged ideological blunt instrument of interest rate caps, which is totally out of step with what is happening internationally in this space and is being used in this sort of legislation. We will not be letting up on this, and I'm hoping that the Minister can provide us with a bit more detail around why interest rate caps are seen as a blunt instrument, and whether or not, and just on that, the SOP that SOPs that have been put up by the Labour Party, by Carol Beaumont on this, are trying simply to address this, and also the accompanying complementary SOP put up by Te Aroha Flavel from the Māori Party, which we also support. We ask the House during the committee stage to do the work that the committee stage should do in the House and support those SOPs.
Carol Beaumont.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Part one is an opportunity to talk about